thank you so much for that warm introduction. And Ron, I am forever indebted to you and the AQR for publishing my work for the first time. And it really was such an important step for me as a writer, and it gave me the courage to send my work out into the world. And I will never forget the thrill of walking into Prairie Lights, which is the fantastic independent bookstore in Iowa City, and going over to the huge wall where they have all their magazines and periodicals and seeing the latest issue of the Alaska Quarterly Review. My issue had a beautiful black and white walrus on its cover, and just feeling such a surge of pride and hope, and just a real sense of this was my first step entering into this conversation with the world of literature and other writers. So it really was a transformative moment for me to have that experience of being published. And then it was sort of the gift that kept on giving when later on in the year, Best American has a wonderful tradition of not only republishing stories, but recognizing 100 stories that have been published throughout the year. And then getting to see the Alaska Quarterly Review story again get mentioned in the index of the Best American Short Stories was such a vote of confidence, and really made me appreciate how literary magazines are very much the lifeblood of our reading landscape. You know, that this is where voices emerge from, and I feel perpetually grateful that for me it started at the AQR. So rather unimaginatively, I thought I would actually read from that first story. So this is a story that then became the opening chapter in my second novel, Ms Hempel Chronicles. So it's a story called Talent, and I will read for about 15 minutes from the opening of Talent. Many of Ms Hempel's students were performing in the show that evening, but to her own secret disappointment, she would not be appearing. All around her, she was confronted with reminders of the event. During morning assembly and announcement, 3 8th grade girls bobbed up and bawled in unison, "Tickets on sale at the door!" Pink flyers slapped crookedly onto the walls. A note from a parent, "Please excuse Louisa, rehearsals ran late. She will turn it in on Monday." Adelaide Burr cornered Miss Hempel during homeroom and described her costume. Adelaide was an avid appreciator of dance. Her first book report had celebrated in a collage the life and contributions of Martha Graham, and her second, a dramatic monologue, was based on a bestseller written by a ballerina who had suffered through several disastrous affairs and then developed a serious cocaine habit. Adelaide seemed excited by the lurid possibilities. "Just imagine," she said to Miss Hempel, and clapped her hands rapturously against her thighs as though her shorts had caught on fire. The bodies of Miss Hempel's students often did that, fly off in strange directions, seemingly of their own accord. Now Adelaide told her that she had choreographed a solo piece to Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Balancing precariously, she said, on a kitchen footstool, she had peeled the glow-in-the-dark stars off the ceiling above her bed. "I have incorporated them into my dance," she said mysteriously. She made Miss Hempel promise that she would come. The building hummed throughout the day. Older girls came leaping down the stairs, fishnet stockings streaming behind them like pennants. Mr. Spiegelman, his yarmulke slightly askew, heaved the grand piano into the auditorium. From the bowels of the science wing, a trombone bleated out a solitary, echoing rendition of Luck Be a Lady. When Ms. Hempel went into the bathroom, she saw pots of lip gloss perched along the edges of the sinks. The girls hadn't taken off their makeup since the run-through that morning, and all day their faces had squirmed self-consciously, their sticky black eyelashes batting, their shiny mouths twitching over their teeth. It was all new to them. Before the show, Miss Hempel groped around the bottom of her pocketbook and found a tube of lipstick she had left there long ago. The shade was a glamorous brown, and as she hid in the faculty lounge, crouching over her compact, she thought, narcissistic, and then corrected herself. Vain was more accurate, although not a vocabulary word. Colorless was perhaps even more precise. She rubbed a finger vigorously over her teeth. There were parents waiting outside the auditorium, herded together like hungry and disconsolate cattle. She would have to smile at them as she walked past. The program announced that Adelaide would be the first performer of the evening. Beneath her name was printed in italics, "I wish to thank my family and friends for believing in me." She entered the stage in darkness. The phosphorescent stars, sprinkled over the stomach of her pink leotard, glowed weakly, as if on the verge of dying. Apparently, most of the adhesive had remained on her bedroom ceiling, so Adelaide had secured the stars with Scotch tape, which caught the light from her parents' flash camera and made her glisten like an amphibian. She still had a little girl's potbelly. Her breasts were only nubs. A blue spotlight followed her nervously about the stage, lurching forward whenever it seemed as if she might leap into the air, which she did often, as well as collapse methodically several times onto the floor. Throughout, she kept her eyes fixed on some beautiful scene in the distance that only she could see. But the dance remained, in some fundamental way, incoherent. Miss Hempel hung onto the edge of her folding chair and tried to see Adelaide as lovely and silvery and ethereal, like a moonbeam or a sylvan nymph. She finally decided, Adelaide is lovely on the inside, and soon the rest of her will catch up. For she admired Adelaide, who could easily have been a pariah with her wall eye and her manic ways, but on most days she willed her eyeball into place and commandeered a sort of following. The next girls were in fact beautiful. The 3 ninth graders stood frozen on the stage in a staggered line, waiting for the tape to begin. They wore shiny athletic pants in shy pastel colors that swished when they started to move. On top, their little cotton camisoles showed the black straps of their bras. Miss Hempel worried about her own bra. All day it had refused to stay put, with one strap sliding down her shoulder at ill-timed moments. She suddenly felt what a relief it was to be sitting in the darkness. As a teacher, she felt herself the object of ferocious scrutiny. Kids missed nothing. They spent entire days looking at her. Miss Hempel was always getting chalk dust in her hair, or less frequently on the tips of her breasts, when she would stretch up on her toes and write the homework assignment across the top of the blackboard. Some days it could be lovely, this attention, but it could be tiring as well, and she was glad for a moment to be there in the audience. The girls jerked about the stage in abrupt, perfectly coordinated movements, their faces stiff with concentration. Occasionally a voice would call out from the audience, "Go, Jane!" and the girl would glance up and beam. The song was friendly and familiar. Miss Hempel slowly realized that it was about a man whose penis became erect while dancing with someone he really liked. He sang, "Girl, I know you felt it. Girl, you know I can't help it." And Miss Hempel felt herself go rigid with alarm. She was caught again in an awkward position, still young enough to decipher the lyrics, yet old enough to feel that a certain degree of outrage was required of her. If only she were truly adult, so that the words were unintelligible, the volume unbearable. Then she couldn't be held responsible. The girl backup singer sighed. "Feel a little poke coming through on you." And Miss Hempel peeked at the rows of parents radiating out around her. They didn't seem to mind or even notice. Their faces were puckered, as they usually were during school performances, trying to see their children as she had tried, graceful, gifted, well-liked. If parents could understand the words, would they find the song acceptable? Miss Hempel was actively developing her sensitivity to the appropriate and inappropriate. She still had difficulty distinguishing between the two. Was it appropriate for her to laugh when a kid farted in class? Was it appropriate for her to wear stretchy fabrics? Miss Hempel was not, she knew, a very good teacher. She made easy plays at popularity, dismissing class a few minutes early on Friday afternoons, beginning each year by reading the Philip Larkin poem about how your parents fuck you up, pretending not to hear when the kids did cruel and accurate impressions of her colleagues. She bribed them with miniature chocolate bars. She extracted compliments from them. She promised herself that she would decorate her classroom with photographs of great women writers, but she never did. She had also discovered by the middle of her second year that the work she assigned her students would come back to plague her tenfold, and the less work she gave them, the less she had to do. She noticed that another middle school English teacher had stumbled upon a brilliant solution: debate. It had the air of intellectual rigor, but you never had to bring piles of it home to correct. You just listened carefully and pretended that you were writing copious and detailed notes in your grade book. But she soon learned that she had no stomach for 8th grade debate. It required a lot of newspaper reading, which she didn't enjoy, and too often the students would make sweeping assertions about terrorist knowledge of chemical weaponry, or atrocities committed by the New York City police, or illegal dumping of toxic waste in residential neighborhoods, which never sounded quite right to her, but she didn't feel sure enough to correct them. She found herself during November's debate unit in the midst of a deafening storm of misinformation, a great deal of it rather frightening, and she feared damaging to her kids' sense of safety and well-being. So they returned to reading novels and poems, a territory across which she stalked with much greater confidence. The literature they read was often bleak and depressing, but it was fiction, and none of her kids needed to worry about getting stranded on a desert island or working as itinerant laborers on an isolated and soul-crushing ranch. This was her policy. Lots of pop quizzes, because she could correct them easily in front of the television, and because they made her kids feel always a little bit afraid. But pop quizzes were not without their own pleasures, which she knew with a certainty stemming from her own days as a student. Now, as a teacher, she would glide into her classroom, the stack of photocopied pages still warm against her chest, and she would sing out to them, "I have a surprise for you." The kids would groan together like a Greek chorus, but still they cleared off their desks, tucked away their books, swiveled their pencils and their tiny plastic sharpeners with a resignation and an eagerness she recognized. Because what are quizzes? They are everything that is reassuring about school. A line for your name, 10 questions, blank spaces, extra credit at the end. There were, of course, those children who didn't thrive under such conditions, who muttered at her, or who cried, or who wrote nothing except their names and a heavy dark F at the top of the page, the self-condemned. The boy now lugging a didgeridoo onto the stage had been one of those. Edward Ashe, former piano prodigy, who by 8th grade had settled into a catatonic state, interrupted only by moments of silent, unrelieved terror whenever she approached his desk. He had the biggest eyes she had ever seen on a boy, and he would widen them like a camera aperture on a gloomy day to suggest innocence and surprise. We were supposed to read chapter 2 last night? So genuinely panicked, so unconvinced by his own excuses, Edward could excite only pity. Ms. Hempel would move away and put another 0 beside his name in her blue gradebook. She did not believe in humiliation, though some other teachers exercised it to remarkable effect. She did not believe in making children unhappy when so many already were. Edward, for example, he loved Scott Joplin, had even composed his own ragtime waltzes, a fact that Miss Hempel found difficult to believe. Her imagination was incapable of seeing Edward Ashe's hands bobbing above the keyboard, his body rocking back and forth on the bench. The Edward she knew moved with a languor that sometimes slowed into complete suspension. When the period ended and the other children bombarded themselves against the door, he would remain in his seat and blink placidly. He never touched the piano now. And once he learned that she, too, owned and cared for a Colombian red-tailed boa constrictor, he would sometimes startle her by asking, in the lunchroom or coming out of the library, "So how's he doing?" It would take Miss Hempel a moment to figure out which Edward was referring to. "He's very well," she would say, finally. "He shed last night." Edward could write beautifully. He told tales from the perspectives of his beloved animals, 3 tarantulas, a ball python, and a boa constrictor. His favorite protagonist was the female tarantula named Jenny. Night falls. She is awoken by a hungry ache inside her belly. She stretches out her furry legs and surveys the sand spreading out around her. Hurrah! A small rustling in the distance. A cricket, a nice, cute cricket. In another story, he described Jenny gazing sadly out the glass walls of her tank. She watches a common household spider busily lowering itself from the back of an upholstered chair. She is astounded by and envious of its weightlessness, its gift of self-suspension. She deplores her own earthbound and cumbersome state. Retreating to the darkness of a rock, away from the unforgiving glare of the heat lamp, Jenny thinks, "I wish I were an acrobat, spinning in the air." Edward added a footnote that read, "This story is unrealistic. Spiders have very poor eyesight. Jenny does not know she lives inside a tank." But now, look at him. And that was the miracle of it all, how some kids found a way to grow into themselves. Edward stood in the middle of the stage, a 10th grader, stately, handsome, serene, his mouth pressed up against a gigantic wooden tube, producing beautiful and otherworldly sounds. The kids in the audience began to stamp their approval. "Ed!" someone howled. She could see Edward struggling not to smile. The strange, long moan trembled for a moment. Okay, I will stop there. And I am so excited to hand the baton over to Robin.